if the science and the advice changed such that keeping schools open would no longer be in the best interests of children and teachers, that we would act. We are now at that stage.
This week will be the last till who knows when Hanover School in North London and every other school in the country will open its doors. Possibly the next time the eldest children here go to school, it'll be to a different school altogether. This was the government bowing to the inevitable. Here, as elsewhere, attendance had been declining across the week. 80% on Monday, 70 on Tuesday, 50 today. The kids here are aware of what's going on. How could they not be? With classes collapsed together because of the virus, all they could do was draw it. What do you know about it?
It's new.
It is new, yeah, it's true.
Plus, it came from animals, I think.
God, you're very well informed.
Sick animals.
Career in epidemiology
Cats
beckons.
and dogs.
But this week has been a nightmare for many teachers, keeping kids entertained and informing parents at the same time when they've had little idea what to say.
At the moment, of our 12 class teachers, we've got 7 self-isolating. Overall, about half of our staff are self-isolating at home. We've been able to stay open merely because of the number of children who are also staying off school now.
We have had to make sure that our communication is really clear, that we've stayed calm and present, and we've held them emotionally, if you like, to make sure that they aren't overwhelmed by the anxiety that they're feeling. We've had to paddle very hard under the surface to make it appear calm and business as normal at school.
There is now clarity about what will happen on Friday, but almost nothing about what comes next, where the kids go, who the key workers are, how kids will be assessed.
So I think actually it has been probably the right decision to make, but as I understand it, they will be graded on their performance over the year. And again, details will come out, over the next few days.
Who's on our team?
Generally, we can understand that as a society, we need to make sure that our fantastic NHS workers are available. We need to make sure those people can be at work. And if there's something we can do to help with their children, then that's something that we have to look at.
And those are the simple bits. Thorniest of all will be the issue of vulnerable children. Today, the Education Secretary promised they could stay at school, but it isn't clear how easy that will be. And if it isn't done, there could be serious consequences. Speaking to a local authority source, they tell me that they're very concerned about the potential impact of school closures on vulnerable children. Specifically, they say their ability to check on those kids is being impeded at the moment by coronavirus. They've got so many social workers off sick or in self-isolation. And in these circumstances, it's the schools which are the canary in the coal mine, the early warning system when something is going wrong. Without them, they say, those kids could be at risk.
Aside from keeping our workforce going, I think there is potentially a real time bomb in terms of those children who we know are already really struggling in society, and the idea that we might lose touch with them, that they might not be able to cope, and that actually no one would have good oversight of the state in which they found themselves. So we already have plans as a school about calling our most vulnerable families on a daily basis, for example, but how sustainable that is over a very long period of time, it remains to be seen.
The other thing that concerns us is at such time that schools reopen, how will we know? How will we know that it's safe to come out to play again? How will we know that our children are ready to come back, and what will that be like for them having been absent for such a long time? So I think it's all very well thinking about closing, but how are we ever going to reopen, and what's it going to be like on the other side? These are all big questions that nobody has an answer for.
The classroom, the coat pegs, the tests, the trips, the goodbyes at the end of the day. Some of the earliest imprints on our memories. For a generation of British school kids, though, those imprints will look different to ours, an education emptier than it should have been.
Lewis Goodall there. Well, joining us now, Damian Hinds, the former Conservative Secretary for Education, Torsten Bell, the Chief Executive of the think tank, the Resolution Foundation, and from Leeds, Jannet Sherrif, who's the Executive Head Teacher at Prince Henry's Grammar School. And if I can, Jannet, I'll start with you. What are you expecting to be the reaction at the school gates tomorrow from parents? I know we've heard there's been a lot of sort of paddling beneath the surface from teachers trying to keep everything calm.
I think that there's still going to be just a lot of questions from our students, from our parents, from our staff. There's a certain degree of certainty given to us today about what's going to happen on Friday at the end of school, but actually it has raised just more and more questions in terms of what is going to happen after that. And I know that when I go into school tomorrow morning that I will be faced with, say, the Year 11, the Year 13 students, and they'll be looking to their teachers to say, what is going to happen? And at the moment, we don't have the full details to be able to reassure them.
Do you think you have the capacity to keep teaching kids at home? I know that you're an iPad school now. Is that your intention, to keep monitoring and doing lessons with the children remotely?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, our school does have a bit of an advantage because we've got an iPad one-to-one scheme in school. And so our teachers and our students are used to communicating in that way, in setting tasks and completing tasks using that technology. However, I think it is a very different thing when the students are at home every day, all day, for however many weeks, and trying to keep that structure in their lives and to try and keep the routine of lessons going. We've been doing our best to prepare our teachers, have not only been delivering lessons during the day, but they've been spending time thinking about and planning the online learning resources so that it can continue with that remote learning once the schools have closed.
And briefly, Lewis was focusing on his in his piece very much on vulnerable children, and he said that schools were often the canaries in the common. They learnt the warning signs if kids weren't showing up, if there were extra problems at home, if things were going wrong. Do you think you will still be able to keep that link, keep vulnerable children and give them the pastoral care they need at this point?
I think it is going to be a real challenge. I was obviously really pleased that the government in their announcement have identified that this is an issue that needs to be dealt with and that they have put in place arrangements that focus on the vulnerable students. However, I think in the reality of making it work is going to be quite challenging. To begin with, some of these vulnerable children, we have to do a lot of coaxing just to get them to school in the first place for some of those. I think it's going to be even harder when many of their peers are not coming to school to actually get them to come to school, even though the school is open for them. And so I think that we're going to have to think carefully about how we can make that attractive to them. And for those that don't turn up, that should be in school, yes, that regular communication through other methods. But I think it is really important that there are other people in the community, not just schools,
that are taking on that role.
These children.
Let me pick up in the studio now, because you heard Jannet sounds incredibly calm, but she raised more questions than clearly they've had answers to. And we know that the government, I think Britain was one of the last countries to take these measures, and yet it hasn't been able really to provide any understanding of what happens after Friday.
Well, I mean, this is a very big set of measures today, and it's, commensurate with the scale of what we're facing in deciding when this was going to happen. And I think Mrs. Sherrif and her colleagues and parents have known this day was coming. In deciding when it was going to come, I mean, it's an almost impossible balance to strike because, of course, this is about slowing the spread of this virus, but it also means, you know, weeks of lost school time for children, and it means disruption for parents and all the knock-on effects of that. So it's a big package. Actually, I think there is quite a lot of detail in it, but inevitably some of the things that need to be worked out, like on qualifications.
Well, before we even get there,
very complex
we don't
topic,
even know.
Will take some time.
We don't really know who the key workers are. We were told very briefly it was NHS, police, supermarket. Is that it?
Well, hang on. We were also told there will be a list forthcoming from the Cabinet Office. I mean, I think as soon as tomorrow. So, and the list of key workers doesn't only apply in education settings, other use for it as well. That's why it comes from the Cabinet Office. I mean, one of the things I asked in Parliament today was that there should be some flexibility. So schools will sometimes be able to identify where somebody who may not be on a key workers occupation list, or indeed somebody who may not be in the strict designation of vulnerable children, they may know that actually provision should be made for that child as well. So some flexibility, I think, will be helpful.
And children will be in a real state of limbo this evening. There might be short-term exhilaration, longer-term desperation.
Yes.
And you heard teachers saying, you know, it's easy to plan an exit, but then you might have 6 months of kids who are literally missing out half a year of education and wondering what they do in that time, whether they can gather, whether they can play sport together, or whether all that counts as the measures that they're shutting for in the first place.
Well, let's be clear, they can't miss half a year of education. It's not the same as schooling. Schooling is the best. There's something magical about the teacher at the front of the room, what they can make happen in a class. But I know a lot of schools already have been doing some preparation work about, you know, building up the programme of work to do from home. It's not the same as just setting a bit of cover work. It's much, much more complex than that. A lot of thought is going into it, and there will be more as well. Your organisation, the BBC, I gather, is planning good extra programming in educational in educational
but won't
modules.
Have any ability to monitor whether kids, you know, are watching and doing homework and following. You know, it's a very different sort of scheme, isn't it?
No ability to monitor. So I was just going to say, technology, and Mrs. Sherrif mentioned this as well, plays a part. I mean, I don't think it should be the whole part. It's very important to have blended methods of learning. But you know, there are ways these days of staying in touch with families. You were talking earlier about particularly with vulnerable families and having key workers being close touch with them, but also more broadly, it's possible to stay in touch and have a two-way communication on progress.
What we're really understanding, Torsten, is how central schools are to the whole economy of the country now, right?
Yeah, I mean, what we're hearing here is the challenges to teachers and to the kids themselves about a big change to their lives. But what we're all going to be feeling is the big change it means for our economy. 34% of all workers in our economy have a child under 16. This is a massive, massive deal, and it comes on top of social distancing measures, not going to shops, not going to restaurants, that are already having a huge effect on our economy. And it's almost hard to, you know, understate how swift this change has been for our economy. These are really very serious times. They are not happening directly because of the coronavirus. They are happening because of our response to it. And that is, you know, that's the right thing to do. But that is a very, very unusual kind of economic shock, and our response to it needs to start stepping up to that.
Stepping up more than we are doing.
Significantly more.
It feels like a levelling action today, but it won't be, will it? I mean, it will affect different families in very different ways, according to the age of the kids, or how many parents are working, or the kind of jobs they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in lots of different ways. If you think about who works in the sectors that have already been most affected by what we're talking about, the social distancing measures, we're talking about 5 million people working in the likes of retail, hospitality. These are lower paying sectors. They earn about over £100 less a week on average than the rest of the population. And then if we look at what's happened today, schools, being able to manage this is going to be significantly easier if you can keep your income and work from home. I'm not saying for any parent that's going to be having kids at home while they work from home that is going to be easy.
There's very little work, yeah.
But let's be clear, low earners, the entire bottom half of earners, only 1 in 10 of them can work at home.
Right.
It's 5 times that at the top. So this is very different depending on where you are in the income distribution.
Jannet, Sherrif, let me go back to you for your thoughts on exams. It sounds like they've been cancelled for May and June, and we don't know whether that means cancelled entirely, but we're guessing yes. That would come down to what? Teacher assessment? Do you feel comfortable with that? Would teachers feel comfortable that gives the right impression of a child who would have been sitting exams? Is it fair?
Well, I think teachers do have a lot of knowledge and information and data about students and about how they have performed, both in their trial exams, their mock exams, but also in ongoing assessments and some of the tasks, the assessment tasks that they have done. So, there is a lot of knowledge there, and teachers do really know their students. However, I think, I can really understand the frustration of young people that have been working really hard and revising and thinking, in the real exam, I'm going to do even better.
Yeah.
And that is going to be really hard for some of our students to kind of accept, and that is going to be a big disappointment to them.
And Damian, it's hard, isn't it? I mean, the point of an exam is it takes out all the personality, all the kind of, character shocks that you might have with a particular pupil or a particular teacher, and that re-enters now. There are some kids who will make a less good impression during the year, won't get their stuff together for a coursework, might think that they're going to cram at the last minute.
Yeah. Well, look, it is difficult, but Emily, the question is, so what else are you going to do? I mean, we have to face up to this crisis, and I think this is saying not having the exams is the only sensible way to do it.
Can I just check? So it wouldn't be a September, October post holidays.
I think the education department will be in close conversation with Ofqual, the qualifications body, to look at all the different ways that you might do it. I mean, the fallback is, of course, teacher assessment, but as Mrs. Sherrif says, I mean, these days there's a lot of data in schools. In fact, in some ways, sometimes too much data in the system. But in a situation like this, it could really come into its own. Some kids, in some subjects, there's assessment as well. So there is some material there to go on and to make sure that it is fair. And I just wanted to clarify one thing from your conversation earlier with Angela. Of course, there's not a question of children not getting qualifications. They will get qualifications. It's the question of how those qualifications are certified, and it does have to be fair, reflect those children's achievements, the work they put in, showing what. But
the yearbook of 2020 will look very different for a lot of kids now.
Yeah,
that's the truth. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.